Hello and good evening. I hope you had a nice day today. It's been a nice long weekend. This evening I'm going to do two things. And the first one is, of course, a book review. I've been thinking about it for a long time that I must, of course, talk about books because Giri Zada is all about books, songs, and conversations. So I have chosen a book, and I hope you will like the discussion that I'm going to bring around this book, along with some personal, recollections as well. The second thing is, of course, we are still in the run-up to Kishore Kumar's birthday on the 4th of August, and I will be bringing another beautiful song. That's a little later. So let me start with the book, and this is the book that I'm going to be talking about. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, The Universe in a Single Atom. And of course the question beneath that is how science and spirituality can serve our world. So the Dalai Lama is seeking to look at an integration and a marriage of science and spirituality. And I think this book also comes because of a very deep seated feeling of discomfort that this great man has about science and spirituality being at odds with each other. So he has written a wonderful book that explores the tenets of science and spirituality from a very fundamental, point of view, and looks at what each has to say, and also talks about how they can come together. So if I, very quickly go back on the cover of the book and look at what a few people have had to say. The Scotsman talks about, reviews the book and says, "No one can deny the Dalai Lama's argument that science should serve us all. A fascinating account of an intellectual journey from the rooftops of Lhasa, that's in Tibet, to the modern world." Let's open up the book and see what it has. This is, of course, a book that was published in 2006 by Abacus, and it's got 10 chapters, and I'm going to be coming to those chapters in a minute. But I want to give you a sense of the book, a core sense of the book, by reading out. In fact, this is where I will mostly read out from, a chapter called as Reflection. And because this is the chapter that sets out the entire argument, and it sets out the entire tone and tenor of the book. And so let me begin by reading from this. The Dalai Lama begins by saying, "I have spent many years reflecting on the remarkable advances of science. Within the short space of my lifetime, the impact of science and technology on humanity has been tremendous. Although my interest in science began with curiosity about a world foreign to me at that time," he's talking about his time in Tibet, "it was not very long before the colossal significance of science for humanity as a whole dawned on me, especially after I came into exile in 1959. As we all know, the Dalai Lama fled Tibet with his followers, and he was granted refugee status in India, and the government in exile came into being in India in 1959, and that is where it continues to this day." He goes on to say, "There is almost no area of human life today that is not touched by the effects of science and technology. Yet, are we clear about the place of science in the totality of human life? What exactly it should do and by what it should be governed? A very fundamental question. This last point is critical because unless the direction of science is guided by a consciously ethical motivation, especially compassion, its effects may fail to bring benefit. They may indeed cause great harm. As you can guess, he is very worried about values in science. And later on, he of course rejects the argument that science is value neutral. Just to give you an example of what his main worries are, is that if science is not guided by other human concerns, fundamental concerns such as compassion, ethics, and so on, care for each other, we will keep seeing many more Hiroshimas. We will keep seeing many more Chernobyls. We will keep seeing many more Bhopals, right? And we will continue to degrade our environment, and we will reach a point when it gets too late for us to do anything. Let me continue. He then juxtaposes Buddhism with this question, or with this concern about science, and he says, in Buddhism, the highest spiritual ideal is to cultivate compassion for all sentient beings and to work for their welfare to the greatest possible extent. So this is the argument. Of course, the Dalai Lama comes from a tradition of Mahayana Buddhism, and which goes back to the great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, I think 2nd century AD or thereabouts. The central question, central for the survival and well-being of our world, is how we can make the wonderful developments of science into something that offers altruistic and compassionate service for the needs of humanity and the other sentient beings with whom we share this earth. So I think he's very clearly saying, what is the direction of science? Is it just, an endless exploration of the natural world using more and more powerful devices? On the one side, going down into the microcosm to see what lies at the end of matter, and on the other side, exploring the vast expanse of the universe to see what happens there. Is that all, right? Or is there anything else to it? Is it governed by human values, concerns, emotions, feelings, which traditionally have not been seen as a domain of science? He goes on to say, perhaps the most important point is to ensure that science never becomes divorced from the basic human feeling of empathy with our human beings. Humanity may end up serving the interests of scientific progress rather than the other way around. That's an important point. Should we serve the interests of scientific progress, all in the name of scientific exploration and discovery and progress, or should it be the other way around? That's a fundamental question. Science and technology are powerful tools, but we must decide how best to use them. What matters above all is the motivation that governs the use of science and technology, in which ideally heart and mind are united. So he's in a sense talking about the left side and the right side of the brain coming together in this pursuit of discovery and inquiry and so on and so forth. Of course, then he moves on to talk about how he looks at science as mainly being an empirical discipline that provides humanity with a powerful access to understanding the natural world, the physical world, the atoms, the skies, the planets, the universe, and so on and so forth. Science proceeds, he says, by means of a very specific method that involves measurement, quantification, and intersubjective verification. So the same experiment conducted in America should yield the results that it gives in India. However, he says, and this is a core argument, within this model, many aspects of human existence, including values, creativity, and spirituality, as well as deeper metaphysical questions, lie outside the scope of scientific inquiry. Of course, he also then goes on to say that in the final analysis, matter as it can be described by physics and as it is governed by the laws of physics is all there is. So this notion is a notion that is sometimes called as scientific materialism, and it comes from a very Newtonian Galilean approach to things, where in which conception the universe was viewed as a large machine that had, that was working according to certain laws, and that the natural sciences or the scientists had to unravel those laws and find out what those laws were. So for a long time, I think this whole dimension of other aspects of human existence, as he talks about, values, creativity, spirituality, emotions, feelings, and so on, they were not part of science. The problem, he says, is not with the empirical data of science, but with the contention that these data alone constitute the legitimate ground for developing a comprehensive worldview or an adequate means for responding to the world's problems. There is more to human existence and to reality itself than current science can ever give access to. So that's how this chapter called Reflection ends. I've just read a few pieces from this particular chapter. And I think that journey of inquiry begins. It's taken forward in this wonderful book through many other chapters, titles such as Encounter with Science. So he talks about his own encounters with science. He moves into an inquiry, or an interrogation I should say, of three core ideas: emptiness, relativity, and quantum physics. So relativity and quantum physics are the developments that occurred, that shook science, much of the scientific world, in the early part of the last century, the 20th century. And then he looks at the understandings that relativity and quantum physics have given us into the nature of matter. And in fact, they usurped the Newtonian classical mechanics that ruled till then. And they painted, and in fact they portrayed, a much more complicated world in which what we saw was not actually there. So in many ways, many things about relativity and quantum mechanics begin to look a lot more closer to traditions of spirituality and religion. And he compares them to the idea of emptiness or shunyata within Mahayana Buddhism. He continues that argument, builds upon it in another chapter called The Big Bang and the Buddhist Beginningless Universe. So within cosmological traditions, of course, it has fallen out of favor, but the steady state cosmology actually posits the idea that the universe never had a beginning, neither will it have an end. And that's a bit in opposition to the models of the Big Bang universe. Of course, the Big Bang theory itself has undergone a lot of revisions, so it's much more intricate than I'm putting it here. He moves on. He talks about evolution, karma, and the world of sentience. 3 chapters, the Dalai Lama deals with a very central question which science is unable to address, or which has been addressed in science or looked at in science in at best a superficial manner: the problem of consciousness. How does one understand consciousness, right? Can scientific materialism give us the answer? And the answer is an overwhelming no, because the laws of physics cannot tell us much about why we feel happy or sad why there is evil in this world, why there is violence, and so on. So you need to have a completely different paradigm, when you're talking about these, when you're talking about consciousness, actually. And of course, in conclusion, and I'm going to read a bit from that chapter, Science, Spirituality and Humanity, page 215. Yeah. Okay. Scientific knowledge, says the Dalai Lama, as it stands today, is not complete. Recognizing this fact clearly recognizing the limits of scientific knowledge, I believe, is essential. Only by such recognition can we genuinely appreciate the need to integrate science within the totality of human knowledge. Otherwise, our conception of the world, including our existence, will be limited to the facts adduced by science, leading to a deeply reductionist, materialist, even nihilistic view of nature or nihilistic worldview. And what is the kind of integration that he's talking about? What does he want? And he says, in Buddhist language, this kind of science can be described as wisdom grounded in and tempered by compassion. That is the number one non-negotiable. Similarly, spirituality is a human journey into our internal resources with the aim of understanding who we are in the deepest sense and of discovering how to live according to the highest possible idea. This too is the union of wisdom and compassion. We are all in this together, says the Dalai Lama. May each one of us, as a member of the human family, respond to the moral obligation to make this collaboration possible. This is my heartfelt plea. I think as we get along more and more in a world that is dominated by even more complex science and technology, this book is a timely reminder that we need to get back to the roots of why we are doing all this, how can it serve us all, and not, as once the philosopher Bertrand Russell says, and not subscribe to the belief or the notion that the universe is an accidental collocation of atoms and molecules and that nothing else matters, right? So I hope you like this review. I'll be bringing many more books and talking about many more books in the weeks to come. See you then. Bye-bye.